To the 20th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. In this series, I discuss the theoretical framework of decolonizing the mind as explained in my book titled Decolonizing the Mind. And in this episode, I'll deal with the narratives in Russia about civilization because decolonizing the mind is about creating a new world civilization. But as in the previous episodes, I'll start with a short overview of the war in Palestine and link it to what's going on in Ukraine. These are the two focal points of the creation of a new multipolar world and a new world civilization. This weekend, I was in London. I'm based in The Hague, and visited, spoke at the Islamophobia conference organized by the Islamic Human Rights Commission in London. And I met a lot of people there. Obviously, Palestine is on our mind and on everybody's mind. And there are many people there knowledgeable about what's going on in the region. I learned a lot from them. And one of the key things I took away is a brother who just came from Lebanon a few days ago. And he explained how in the whole of Lebanon, which is majority Sunni, the pictures and images of the Sunni leader there, who is a pro-Western leader, was replaced by images of the leaders of Hamas, and how everybody in Lebanon expects that this might be the final war that opens up a whole era of peace and prosperity for the region once the state of Israel is gone. And I think the idea that Sunni Shia controversies and antagonism would exist for the future because it existed in the past. If one thing the war in Gaza has done, has united Sunni and Shia, and that is a hopeful sign. But the horrors of the Gaza war, which breaks our heart if we look at what's going on with 18,000 Palestinians killed, overwhelmingly majority are women and children, about 50,000 wounded. That is huge. And also for the Israeli occupation force, 100 soldiers has been killed since October 7. Since the start of the Gaza war, and since October 7, the amount is 425 with 5,000 wounded. Israel has never suffered so many casualties in the war with Palestine. So the grave situation in Palestine, the toll it takes on the Palestinian civilians, and the fight that Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other resistance groups are fighting, this is has a big meaning for world history. Last week there are other developments. President Putin of Russia visited Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Iran's president visited Moscow on December 7th, the next day. They signed declarations to counter US sanctions. And this tells you that Russia is playing a role, as I mentioned in one of the early episodes, an increasingly important role in countering US hegemony in Western Asia, but also in shaping the new Western Asia. And the war in Ukraine, it's very important to see that all the predictions of the demise of the Russian economy due to the sanctions by Europe and USA just has turned around. One analysis last week explained that the European Union overpaid 150 billion for gas due to Russian sanctions. So what's happening is this. They said they wouldn't buy Russian gas, but they do. They buy Russian gas through other intermediaries and pay obviously much more for the Russian gas and other gas. And at the end of the day, Russia gets richer while the West bleeds trillions in overdue payment, but also in funding the failed war in Ukraine. Another big issue was putting an oil price cap on Russian oil. Russian oil could not be sold above a certain cap. It failed. Russia is freely selling oil according to the market and not according to the wishes of the USA. Another important development, a Fatah official, Jibril Rajoub, who is seen as the possible successor to President Abbas, he gave an interview in which he says the October 7 attack was not terror but a natural reaction to the Israeli occupation. This attack was nothing compared to the explosion expected in the West Bank. Fatah controls the West Bank, Hamas controls Gaza. And now where Fatah normally acts as an agent of Israel to arrest people of Hamas, this guy, Rajoub, is now saying on the reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, I say to everyone that blood is thicker than water. Hamas is and will remain part of the Palestinian national fabric, part of the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian political fabric. This campaign, that is the Gaza war, will be a springboard for attaining Palestinian national unity with one people, one leadership, and one goal, the establishment of an independent Palestine with complete sovereignty over all the Palestinian territories. This is a Fatah official, and not just an official, a possible successor to President Abbas, saying this. This is huge. Now, the link between Ukraine and Palestine is very important. NATO supports Israel. NATO supports Ukraine politically, militarily, economically, globally. They are losing in Ukraine and they think they will win in Israel. And the media is just an instrument of war, it's not objective, is feeding the narrative as if Russia is losing in Ukraine and Hamas is losing and the Palestinian people are losing in Gaza. But the reality is, in Palestine and in Ukraine, the West is moving towards its end of its hegemony. And that is one thing we should remember. In Ukraine, things are moving very fast. Zelensky will be out in a few months, probably. News item of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service said that they receive information that the West is actively engaged in discussion regarding the need to replace Zelensky with other people. And the reason for it is the military failures, the widespread corruption. They mention corruption and his inability to effectively negotiate the ongoing conflict in a way that aligns with Washington's interest. For Washington now, the interest is ending the war. They lost the war, and now they have to end it. They have to end the sending of money and weapons, and Zelensky is pressing them for more money and weapons. And the news item mentioned names of people that the West is considering to replace Zelensky. Different people they have mentioned in their items. Now, let's go on to the main story of this episode, which is the Russian idea of civilization. In order to understand that, you need to understand the history of the Russian Revolution the theory of Eurasianism, and Putin's evolution towards the concept of civilizational state. Now, the Russian Revolution has a long history. In 1861, feudalism was abolished in Russia by Tsar Alexander II. In England, it was abolished, in 1660, in France in 1789. In 1917, Russia had a population of 175 million, of which 10% was working class. According to the Marxist theory, socialist revolution would occur in a highly developed capitalist country like Germany. But it happened in Russia, where the working class was a minority and the peasantry was a huge majority. The Russian Revolution was a political, economic, social, and cultural revolution. People try to forget that, but the cultural revolution was deep. Church weddings were abolished and civil partnership was introduced. Divorce was a matter of choice. Abortion was legalized. Homosexuality was decriminalized, and gay marriage was legalized. And that was in 1917. Now, in 1921, the Soviet government established a state general planning commission called Gosplan. They came up with the first 5-year plan, and after a short period of allowing capitalist growth in agriculture, at the end of the day, in 1929, the means of production is in the hand of the state. Prices of goods and services are determined by the central plan. State-owned firms have an account at the central bank. There's no free flow of money. There's no free banking system. Money decided to buy materials and semi-finished projects cannot be used to pay wages. Money for wages cannot be used for materials. So there was a strict planning. The planning agency decides on where, how, and how much to invest. The state ensures every worker has a job based on their qualification. So there's full employment. The education system and the job market are integrated. So people who get an education are sure that they get a job. The state determines the wages. This is how central planning works. An economist, Michael Ellman, described the result. The socialist planning system had a number of important achievements to its credit. It introduced mass production into Soviet industry. It greatly increased the output of a number of key industrial sectors, such as oil and steel. It produced a huge number of weapons necessary to emerge victorious from World War II. It provided full employment. It produced the world's first Earth satellite. It invested heavily in human capital. Its educational system, except in the social sciences, was good by international standards and produced large numbers of qualified people. So mathematics, physics, biology, they excelled in it. During the 1950s, the USSR enjoyed a golden age with growth rates much in excess of those in the USA or the UK. Now, if central planning was so fantastic, why did the system collapse in 1991? Well, central planning initially worked, but later on it didn't. Since 1980s, there were long shopping lines, empty store windows, broken cars, deteriorated living standards became part and parcel of the lives of an average system. The central planning couldn't function anymore. Within the elites, discussion on the economic and political system led to challenging basic assumptions about the Soviet system. Should central planning be abandoned in favor of decentralized management of the economy? Should prices, profit, credits, and other market instruments be introduced into the economy? Should workers' participation in the management of firms be introduced? Now, if you look at how Mikhail Gorbachev, who became General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1985, articulated reforms, He said we need perestroika and we need glasnost. Perestroika was the restructuring of the economy and society. Glasnost was about opening up society to public discussion and public participation. And Gorbachev led the Soviet Union toward the end of the Cold War. He signed the Arms Control Treaty for the elimination of intermediate range and shorter range missiles with the USA in 1987. In 1989, he withdrew the Soviet army from Afghanistan, which the USSR had invaded 10 years earlier in support of the Communist Party and the communist government of that country. He withdrew support for Cuba and Nicaragua Sandinistas and for the liberation movements in Angola and Ethiopia, much to the liking of the West. Glasnost had opened the door to questioning the whole legacy of the Russian Revolution, including a theoretical foundation, which is Marxism. A scholar, Martin Malia, said, "What has begun as a limited process of filling in factual blank spots of the Stalin era had led to a flood of candor in which not only were the myth of the long decades of Stalin and Brezhnev swept away, but the very foundation of Sovietism, the economic theories of Marx, and even the political practice of Lenin were discredited. By 1988, Marxism-Leninism was in shambles because glasnost enabled people to criticize the system. In 1987, for the first time, all kinds of organizations began to rise, independent of the Communist Party, and they brought important discussion to the public domain. Ecology, democratization, political reform. Some people began to argue for the establishment of political parties outside the Communist parties. So in the Soviet Union, a new civil society arose. On July 1, 1988, the 19-party conference adopted the proposal to create a new supreme legislative body called the Congress of People Deputies of the Soviet Union, and in this way they separated the party from the state. The Congress would be a new legislative body. Now, it was elected and held its first session on May, from 25th of May till June 9th, 1989, and Martin Malia describes this session. He says, and now there were also people elected in the Congress who were not from the Communist Party. He said, as the days went by, speaker after speaker attacked one or another vice of the system, the inefficiency of the economy, the widespread poverty of the country, the corruption of the party, the scandals of hospitals without running hot water and healthcare without medicine, the inadequacies of education, the misconduct of the army in Afghanistan and Georgia, and finally, in one astounding outburst, the role of the KGB, the security agency, as an underground empire exercising comprehensive control over society. Within the 12 days of the Congress, when the 12 days of the Congress were finished, the Soviet Union was a new country. The work of desacralizing the system begun by Kirchner was now completed. Millions of people had heard their private thoughts uttered in public. Individuals saw that the evils they had observed in their own little corner of the system were common to the whole Union. And everyone now knew it was possible to say the bolder things without fear of retribution. So intense was the public interest in the Congress that industrial production dropped 20% during the televised coverage of the proceedings. And then the national question. The Soviet Union was a federal union consisting of 15 Soviet republics: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldavia, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Uzbekistan. Initially, these ethnic republics had the right to succession from the Soviet Union, but under Stalin, national sentiments were ruthlessly suppressed. The sentiments aroused by glasnost unleashed new demands for independence in 1981. And in 1981, the USSR, the Soviet Union, was dissolved into 15 separate states. And then in the rest of Eastern Europe, in the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, the Berlin Wall fall on November 9, 1989. And a year later, East and West Germany were united as one state. And nobody at that time, before 1989, could believe that this would once happen and that it would be possible. In Hungary, social struggle in 1989 led to free elections in May 1919, which the communists lost. In Czechoslovakia, demonstrations brought down the communist government in November 17, 1989. Then the demise of the Russian Communist Party. In 1989, after the first Congress, workers went on strikes for economic reasons, but soon put the demand and the leading role of the Communist Party. In Congress, Boris Yeltsin formed a caucus with a concrete program and the leading role of the Communist Party and introduced a multi-party system, private property, and a market economy. In June 12, 1919, Yeltsin won 57% of the popular vote in presidential elections for the Russian Republic, which was then the largest republic in the Soviet Union. And on November 6, 1991, Yeltsin issued a decree banning all Communist Party activities on Russian soil. He was a former General Secretary of the Communist Party. In December, Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus declared that the Soviet Union no longer existed. On December 16, the Supreme Soviet officially declared that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. But then, a scholar, Paul Khlebnikov, explains how things in Russia went from perestroika to katastroika. When Yeltsin's government came to power, they freed prices. It unleashed hyperinflation, which instantly impoverished the majority of the population. The introduction of the free market didn't produce a more efficient economy. It produced relentless economic decline. Privatization enriched only a small number of corrupt insiders. The country was being looted and destroyed by the new system. 1996, Yeltsin barely wins presidential elections, and 3 years later he steps down and appoints Vladimir Putin as his successor. Now compare China with the Soviet Union. When Soviet President Gorbachev arrived in Beijing on May 15, 1989, that was shortly after a mass student demonstration had occurred at the Tiananmen Square in Peking. Some students saw Gorbachev as an exemplary leader for change. In a speech in Beijing, Gorbachev argued that economic reform will not work unless supported by a radical transformation of the political system. China's history proved him wrong. It was the other way around. Political reform is not needed if the life of people improves dramatically through radical economic transformation. Now, in the new elections, which was due to on March 26, 2000, Putin, on behalf of the United Russian Party, won the presidential elections with just 53% of the votes. His main competitor from the Communist Party, Shuganov, got almost 30%. So the idea that elections in Russia putting to power are sham elections is just not true. In 2004, Putin was re-elected and he got almost 20% more votes than 4 years before, while the Communist Party got 15% less. So Putin was elected with a majority of 72%. Normally, in a communist period, people were elected with 99% of the votes. This shows you that Putin was elected in honest competition from other parties. The Russian constitution had a two-term limit for presidential candidates. In 2008, Dmitry Medvedev ran for the United Russian Party and won with 71% of the vote, while Shuganov got 80%. Putin was appointed prime minister, not president, so he maintained his political influence. And in 2008, the presidential term was extended for 4 to 6 years, started with the 2012 elections, where Putin ran again and won with 64% of the votes, Suganov getting 16%. So Putin got 8% less than when he was elected in 2004. In 2019, he won the presidential election with 78% of the votes, going up 14%, while the Communist Party got 12%. The next presidential election is next year. So why has Putin gained in democratically elections so much support? First, look at his economic policy. Russian economy grew from 1 trillion US dollars in 2000 to 4.7 trillion, an average of 22% per year. So Russia experienced economic progress. And then the security issue. He ended the terrorist attacks from Chechnya, securing peace with Chechnya in 2009, defeated ISIS in Syria in the war between 2015 and 2019, and then dealt with the next threat, which is the NATO expansion to the east surrounding Russia and the war in Ukraine, supported by the population after 14,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians have been killed in the Donbas region. The Russian population supports Putin, and in the Western media, they do as if Putin has no support in Russia. The population doesn't support him, and he's a dictator. This is what you need to know to understand the narrative. In China, they hold on to socialism, but they call it socialist with Chinese characteristics. The Soviet Union, Marxism, Leninism was a dead end. And now, after the demise of the Soviet Union, there's a search in Russia for a new identity. And one theoretical framework which is being used, developed by Alexander Dugin, a Russian philosopher and political scientist, is Eurasianism. And Dugin defined it as follows. Eurasianism is an ideological and social political current born within the environment of the first wave of Russian migration. And the first wave was after the Russian Revolution between 1919 and 1939. A lot of Russian migrated to the West and to communities outside the Russian borders. And there, the intellectual environment was for the development, of a new concept of Russian culture as a non-European phenomenon, and as a original combination of Western and Eastern features, European and Asian features, Eurasianism. As a consequence, Russian culture belongs to both East and West, and at the same time cannot be reduced either to the former or the latter. Eurasianism viewed Russian culture not as simply a component of European civilization, but also as an original civilization, encompassing the experience not only of the West, but also to the same extent of the East. The Russian people from this perspective must not be placed either among the European nor among the Asian people. It belongs to a completely unique Eurasian community. The Eurasian project was developed in the form of a political philosophy on the basis of the multipolarity of civilizations, anti-imperialism, anti-modernism, and on the structure of Russia itself. The last was defined in terms of the principles of the Slavophiles, along with the important addition of a positive evaluation of the cultural elements which had been borrowed from the Russian from Asiatic societies beginning with the period of the Mongols. So Dugin says the primary concern of Eurasian philosophy is civilization. There are different civilizations, not only one. Now here you see that in Russia as in China, the concept of civilization is being introduced in the intellectual narrative. Dugin continues, there are different civilizations, not only one. Each of them has its own structure that defines the elements of which it consists and which gives them meaning and coherence. We can't apply the rules and structures we find in one structure to those we find in another civilization, not in a diachronic or synchronic way. Each civilizational structure possesses its own sense of time and its own space. They are thus incomparable with one another. Every human society belongs to a particular civilization and is to be studied only in accordance with its own criteria. Now, Dugin refers to Nikolai Trubetskoy, which is a philosopher, in the beginning of the 19th century, who wrote a book on the legacy of Genghis Khan and other essays on Russian identity. And he says, Genghis Khan was the bearer of an important positive idea and the desire to create and organize, not the desire to destroy, as the West depicts Genghis Khan as a ruthless dictator who destroys everything. And he says Genghis Khan was a creator. He was religious but didn't force one religion upon his people. There were Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, shamanists in his administration. He supported infrastructures for the different religions. Genghis Khan made a distinction between two types of people, traitors and people with moral conviction. When he conquered a place, those who betrayed their king were executed and those who defended him with conviction were set free. His administration was to be filled only with people from the second category, those with conviction. In defining the historical essence of the Russian state, he identified it with the nucleus of Genghis Khan Empire. Eurasia is a geographically, ethnographically, and economically integrated system whose political unification was historically inevitable, and Genghis Khan was the first to accomplish this unification. So you see, your Russian intellectuals outside the realm of Marxism are thinking about what is Russian identity. If it's not class, it is civilization. And how historically are you looking for a model for it in the East and in the West, but moreover, neither in the East nor in the West. Now, Putin gave an evaluation of the Soviet experiments. He said, for almost 3/4 of the outgoing century, Russia lived under the sign of the implementation of the communist doctrine. It would be a mistake not to see, and even more so to deny, the unquestionable achievements of those times. But it would be an even bigger mistake not to realize the outrageous price our country and its people had to pay for the Bolshevik experiment. What is more, it would be a mistake not to understand its historic futility. Communism and the power of Soviets didn't make Russia a prosperous country with a dynamically developing society and free people. He talks about free people, the freedom that didn't exist under communism. Communism vividly demonstrated its inaptitude for sound self-development, dooming our country to a steady lag behind economically advanced countries. It was a road to a blank alley which is far away from the mainstream civilization. And then he meant mainstream civilization as Western civilization. Now, his view on civilization changed. Russia, he says now, is not just a country, it's a separate civilization, as Dugin was arguing. And the basis of the Russian civilization, says Putin, is the Russian Orthodox Church. He says, this faith has always accompanied us. It strengthened when our country, our people face hardship. There were very tough years of militant atheism when priests were destroyed, temples were ruined. But at the same time, a new religion was created. In fact, the communist ideology is similar to Christianity. Freedom, brotherhood, equality, justice, it's all enshrined in the Holy Writ. And what about the moral code of the builder of communism? This is a primitive excerpt of the Bible. Nothing new was invented. Look, Lenin was put in a mausoleum. In what way is it different from the relics of saints of Orthodox, just for Christians, he says? So he now says, look, we need to build a new society. And his economic policy and his economic philosophy, this is how he articulates it. He says, he's not against free market, neither against entrepreneurship, the capitalists. But he says, a responsible Russian entrepreneur is a true citizen of Russia who understands his interests and acts in his interests, doesn't hide assets in offshore accounts, but registers companies here in our country and does not become dependent on foreign authorities. I'm sure that a greater number of our businessmen share these values. The stronger Russia will be, the stronger our economy will become, the faster life around us will improve, and of course, the greater standing in society and respect entrepreneurs will enjoy. So he's saying we need nationalist entrepreneurs who put the interests of the Soviet Union and the people of the Soviet Union before the interests of foreign capital and of national capital. They say if national capital works in favor of the people, both will benefit. Now he says, I propose considering the annual publication of non-financial reporting by majority enterprises, which will focus on what a particular company has done for society, for a particular village, town, region, or the country. I'm aware of the fact that the vast majority, almost all companies have such social programs. They are known to a limited number of people. Let all of society learn about them. This will benefit everyone and will be a good example for everyone. So he's saying normally a company is required annually, to report on their financial situation, and they have to deposit the financial account to the Chamber of Commerce or other institutes. And now he says, apart from the financial reporting, you need to introduce non-financial reporting that focuses what is your moral and social contribution to developing a village, a town, your region, a community, not just your company. What are you doing for society? And he says they are doing it already, but you should put it in a card of required reporting. Putin is also a view of colonialism. He says, it is worth reminding the West that it began its colonial policy back in the Middle Ages, followed by the worldwide slave trade. He brings up the Atlantic slave trade, the genocide of the Indian tribes in America, the plunder of India and Africa, the wars of England and France against China, the Opium Wars I mentioned in the previous episode, and as a result of which it was forced to open its ports to the opium trade. What they did was get entire nation hooked on drugs and purposely exterminated entire ethnic groups for the sake of grabbing land and resources, hunting people like animals. It's contrary to human nature, truth, freedom, and justice. This is his view on colonialism. He read about colonialism. He knows very well about the crime of colonialism. He said, while we are proud that in the 20th century our country led the anti-colonial movement, which opened up opportunities for many people around the world to make progress, reduce poverty, inequality, and defeat hunger and disease. So he contrasts the USSR and Russia with the United States. The United States is pro-colonialism and Russia is anti-colonialist. Putin says, from our perspective, civilization is a multifaceted concept subject to various interpretation. There was once an outwardly colonial interpretation whereby there was a civilized world serving as a model for the rest, and everyone was supposed to conform to those standards. Those who disagreed were be to coerce into this civilization by the judgment of the enlightened master. These times, as I said, are now in the past, and our understanding of civilization is quite different. So he says the concept of civilization was used by the European to make a distinction between the uncivilized and the civilized. And the civilized world, had the duty to civilize the uncivilized. He says that's a colonial concept that goes back to the European Enlightenment, as we argue in DTM. He says there's another concept of civilization that is very different. And then he puts in how to look at the Russian state. Our state was built around values of multi-ethnic harmony. This is a bedrock foundation underlying our consolidation, which is only getting stronger in the face of external aggression and threats. Our adversaries that I mentioned earlier, people with neo-colonial mindset, half-wits in fact, are unable to realize that diversity makes us stronger. So he says while other people see universalism, of European values as the way forward, he says diversity, what we would call in DTM pluriversity, is the way forward, the respect of the different civilization. He says, it's not by chance, and I want to emphasize this, he says, that almost all the people of Russia have joined the ranks of the fighters in the special military operation in Ukraine or volunteered to help on the home front. As of now, representatives of over 100 ethnic groups living in Russia have been decorated with high military awards. So he says there are 100 ethnic groups living in Russia, and they participate in the war in Ukraine. And he says the amendments to the constitution, including those made thanks to your contribution, he was talking to an audience of religious people. Thanks to your contribution, colleagues have formalized the protection of the cultural identity of all people of Russia and the preservation of our country's language and ethno-cultural diversity. It's important that this is based on our common values and principles and a firm belief that we are all different. And Putin positions Russia's role in world history. In this year, he gave a speech. He says, our fight for sovereignty and justice is, without exaggeration, one of national liberation because we are upholding the security and well-being of our people and our supreme historical right to be Russia, a strong independent power, a civilizational state. He uses the concept of a civilization state, which also is used in China. I mentioned the book by Zhang Weiwei, a Chinese scholar, called A Civilization State, China's a Civilization State. He says it is our country. It is the Russian world that has blocked the way of those who aspired to world domination and exceptionalism as it has happened many times in history. We are now fighting not just for Russia's freedom, but for the freedom of the whole world. We can frankly say that the dictatorship of one hegemon is becoming decrepit. We see it, and everyone sees it now. It's getting out of control and is simply dangerous for others. It is now clear to the global majority, but again, it is our country that is now at the forefront of building a fairer world order. And I would like to stress this. Without a sovereign and strong Russia, no lasting and stable economic international system is possible. And he makes a connection between the fight that Russia is fighting in Ukraine and Palestine. He says, we must be clear who is really behind the tragedy of the people of the Middle East and other regions of the world, who is organizing the deadly chaos and who benefits from it. The United States as a world superpower, even based on trends in the global economy, is weakening. They are losing their positions. The American world with one hegemon is collapsing, disappearing gradually but steadily, becoming a thing of the past. But the United States doesn't want to put up with this. Today, Russia is not only actively participating in the formation of a new, fairer, multipolar world with equal rights and opportunities for all countries and civilizations. To be where the fate of Russia, but also the whole world, is being decided, including the future of Palestine. So he's saying Russia is creating a new world order. And he takes in the concept of civilization, a new world civilization. And the war in Palestine and Ukraine are part of that process. It's a war that is engineered and supported by the United States. So next time I will talk about the Indian narrative of civilization. I will go into Hinduism, Buddhism, and other norms, narratives, and also on Hindutva. And for now, I also, put up an agenda of meetings and discussions I will have, public ones. Saturday, December 16 at 1800 p.m. Amsterdam time. I will have a Zoom meeting on DTM with Argentinian mathematician and hard scientist. If you want to attend it, send an email to mathnetwork@din.today, MATH, mathematical, mathnetwork@din.today, and then you'll get the Zoom link. If you want to look up the book on what I say about Russia, look at the index for Russia, and you could download this PDF of the PowerPoint on sandahira.com. If you want to support the channel, subscribe to it, share it with friends, family, and colleagues, encourage them to subscribe, get involved in discussion group, and if you want to make a donation, look at sandahira.com on how to do it. Thank you for your attention and hope to see you next time.